Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming for this session. Be the last one of this fantastic event. I tell you, this is my sixth CS2. Inaugural. We were just talking about the first time that Stacy Bostjanek was at, the very first installment of CS2 in Huntsville. I was back in September of 2019. So it's always been an excellent opportunity to meet many of you, my peers in the defense industrial base, as well as customers and partners of ours. As we looked at framing out this particular session, in the past I've really focused quite a bit on compliance and a lot of the capabilities that we have from Microsoft in terms of alignment with the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification and our CMMC acceleration program. We wanted to do some fresh content today. So this is an opportunity for us to step beyond compliance and look at how our Microsoft holistically is addressing security across the domains, across industry, to include not just the defense industrial base, but working with Department of Defense, federal agencies, and even governments across the globe. So for those of you that haven't met me before, my focus at Microsoft is exclusively on the defense industrial base. So I've been working with our product offerings, especially around our government offerings with Microsoft 365 GCC High and Azure Government, going back to our very first deployment of GCC High back when it was called Trailblazer. It's about 6 years ago. It's been a wonderful journey to see it go from just an Exchange Online email-only solution to now having a full complement of the security suite, which we'll be talking about today. I will say this, that if you're able to stay awake for this entire session, then you can earn a Microsoft certification for security, because we got a lot to cover today. It's going to be awesome. We've got some branding changes, so many of you that have been deep into our product stack are going to get introduced to some of our new branding like Purview. Fear not, I'll let you know what the mapping is to it and the rationale behind it. And without further ado, we'll dive into the agenda. So today we're going to talk about, at a high level, a little bit of marketing. It's going to give you a view on what our strategy is at Microsoft around security and compliance. And then we'll go into the new product suites or our capabilities, especially around the new product families. At a high level, of course, give context in terms of what our capabilities are that map into CMMC, and specifically the customer scope of responsibility, right? This is in focus on how you leverage the capabilities of our platform to help you demonstrate compliance with CMMC, but let's take it beyond that to look at how you're actually securing your enterprise IT, right? The non-federal information systems in context of CMMC. So without further ado, you've heard a common theme across the various different sessions here at CS2 this week, yesterday and today. So like, for example, Bob yesterday in his session talked quite a bit about how we need to go beyond the check boxes, right? That compliance is about going through 110 controls or practices for CMMC and NIST 800-171, and meeting that obligation, of course, that you have. Stacy even mentioned in the last session that this is the bar, right? This is the minimum set of activities that you need to do in order to meet your compliance requirements with, for example, your contract with the DoD or flow down that you have from your primes. But it is much more than that. It's much more adaptive in terms of being able to look at how you're going to address security, not just within your enterprise, but as you are being faced with new threat and vulnerabilities like malware, that you're able to secure your environment and to leverage this secure platform in combination with your compliance requirements. So it is really that opportunity for you to secure your environment, and that the compliance comes along with it, right? There's certain documentation and so forth that you would need to do to complement the security, but this is being really adaptive at looking at vulnerability and threat assessment and remediation within your environment. What we found is it is pretty alarming, right? Over the last several years, you've seen this massive uptick in, for example, ransomware attacks. It's like 150% increase just in 2021 alone, right? Or if you look at malware within email, that is up over 660% year over year in terms of what we're just seeing as a cloud service provider for email, and being able to not only identify those malicious attacks, but to help you to both block and remediate those. The other thing that we've heard loud and clear from our customers is that this isn't just specific to the Microsoft platform. Of course, it is paramount that we have a best of platform approach for being able to integrate in our security features within, for example, Microsoft 365, or of course into Azure for infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, but as your whole data estate, right? So we're looking at how you can help to secure your environment, whether it's hybrid and applications and servers that you're running in your on-premises environment, or even multi-cloud, extending out into AWS or into Google and other various different cloud service providers, and even extending out beyond your traditional servers and endpoints and clients to include like IoT and operational technology. And we'll dive into that as we go through the presentation. So if you look at Microsoft on the front line, you probably find it surprising that Microsoft is the largest security vendor on the planet, right? It has the largest cross-section in terms of the number of services that we provide to our customers, both in the United States and globally. We've got over 785,000 organizations that we help to secure. And you may have heard, like, for example, yesterday with Seth from Kuzara doing his session on threat and SIM solutions, et cetera, that you know, the benefit, or one of the greatest advantages of moving to the cloud and taking advantage of the cloud security stack is the fact that we do have the visibility across so many different platform services and customers that we're able to see and be able to respond to over 24 trillion signals per day. That's with a T, right? So it is really it's a huge obligation from Microsoft, of course, for us to be able to address that and protect our systems on the back end and make sure that you don't have vulnerabilities, of course, as a cloud service provider, but also to extend those capabilities to you as a customer or partner working within our products and services. Over 40 plus nation state actors. You've seen some of the news that we've had here recently around some of the vulnerabilities we've been able to address over in the Ukraine, et cetera, within some of the cybersecurity attacks with Russia, et cetera. So that is a major obligation that we have, and to extend to you, of course, leveraging our products and services. So the transformation has really begun to impact you as an enterprise. Historically, the Chief Information Security Officer may be only primarily focused on your corporate or enterprise locations and, of course, servers that are running in your data center or endpoints that you manage for clients. It's really, especially with the transformation that's occurred as a result of the pandemic, folks are now working from home. You're using home networks, or you're leveraging BYOD strategies for devices, et cetera, that's really extended out in the spectrum of all the different touch points that you have for securing your environment, right? It's not just your traditional enterprise IT. Now you're also focused on being able to secure applications or collaboration that you have with partners and various other regulatory bodies, et cetera, and to include being able to have a holistic approach to the way that you address security across your organization. So with Microsoft, what we've done is come up with a strategy for an end-to-end or holistic view of the way that you would address security within not just your enterprise infrastructure IT, but also across the spectrum from everything from IoT to endpoint devices, et cetera, of course, with a focus on, for example, identity as a control plane. A major part of our strategy is, of course, extending out with zero trust and being able to provide a set of foundational services that extend not just from, for example, being able to protect email, but how that correlates with the way that you would collaborate across endpoints, and of course into various different cloud solutions that we offer. So that's your data really anywhere, and it's an ability to do automation and threat and vulnerability management across the entire spectrum. Now, if we look at these pillars, they really do sit on a foundation of what we've evolved, and we call it SCIM now. So if you see that acronym, we internally at Microsoft, we've been more frequently calling it SCIM. That is our security, compliance. It would include identity management, of course, and management of your infrastructure and governance policies. There's also a huge focus that we've been layering in now with privacy. So we'll talk a bit about how we've introduced privacy, especially in alignment with GDPR in the EU, and now is really pervasive across all of our cloud solutions, not just to service our European customer base, but also for you here in the United States or even globally. And of course, I mentioned that it is multi-domain. It is across multiple platforms, not just for Microsoft cloud products, but also extending into the hybrid data center and to multi-cloud solutions. So this is, let me just go ahead and build this out. One of the things that, just a little backdrop or a story for me, I joined Microsoft 15 years ago as an identity, security, and compliance subject matter expert. And it was a relatively small community of us back then. This really predates the release of our cloud or enterprise solutions. Back then it was more about, of course, building out big Active Directory, domain services, implementations, or doing what's now Microsoft Identity Integration, Identity Manager integration for identity management, et cetera. But it also aligned really closely with how we would deliver cloud services. So I became the first cloud architect for the public sector back 15 years ago. And the reason for it is because even then, the biggest blocker to moving to the cloud was always identity and security. And of course, that obligation to compliance. But back then, it was very much a product-centric approach to the way that we address security. So, we would have incredible capabilities that we would integrate into, for example, Exchange Online for being able to secure whether it's RBAC implementation inside of Exchange, or doing email or scanning for malware within Exchange. As we have continued to evolve, we would layer in these capabilities and these investments that would really, in terms of a maturity curve, extend beyond just the individual products such as Exchange or SharePoint or network management, et cetera, to include now the ability to have a first-class security capability. And that's what you're seeing evolve now with our various products, whether it's Microsoft Defender, that it's evolved from specific capabilities that we had in our products now to first-class capabilities as a security and being able to extend outside of the Microsoft cloud. It's amazing because even when we first, wow, that's a big helicopter. It's an Osprey. That's amazing. I don't know if I've seen one of those in person. That there is a, just a few years ago when we introduced Microsoft GCC High, right, there was no SIM solution that we had as a first-party offering, right? Just in that period of time, we've come out with Sentinel as our cloud-native SIM solution in 2019. Of course, we've been talking about it for years now. It seems like we've had it forever, but if you think about it, it's like 3.5 years ago that we introduced that capability. And now we're in the top right-hand corner of the Gartner Magic Quadrant for SIM solutions. So it's a major investment that we have in terms of looking at our past investments up of $5 billion is moving forward. Satya has come out and been on the record to say that we're going to have over $20 billion in the next 5 years. Big part of of course, looking at working with many of you, our customers and partners, is that you have a significant investments today already in existing security capabilities. So that would extend to a lot of best-of-breed solutions. Of course, most of my larger-sized DIB Prime customers are running, for example, Splunk for their SIEM solution, et cetera. We're not necessarily looking to just go and completely replace or offset the existing investments that you make. So of course, there's point solutions, et cetera. We're looking to help integrate into those, but at the same time coming up with a platform play that we have, the best of a security platform, as I was mentioning, that's an end-to-end approach to security. So it is kind of best of breed versus best of platform, but there is an integration story that you have there. And with that, that it does provide a foundation. You may have seen this slide in the past that I've delivered as part of the CMMC acceleration program, where the SCIM capabilities are foundational. So let's go ahead and dive into the portfolio. So the Microsoft Defender is, it's been around now for about 6 months. So many of you have been introduced to Defender. If not, had a good chuckle at the fact that we've renamed about 20 different products Microsoft Defender. I think there was one of my favorites was Defender for CUI, but we'll save that for the for happy hour later on tonight.
Do you even know how many names the sensitivity label is?
Right. Yeah, I could go through a whole history of that. I got a slide for it. Active Directory RMS anyway. So, with the extension of Microsoft Defender, so I took the liberty here of putting in Security Suite. You're not going to find that in our marketing, but it really is. It is our platform play of being the family or suite of capabilities that are really focused on security, right? And this is extending from the SIEM and SOAR solutions that we have with our cloud-native SIEM with Microsoft Sentinel. It's also our XDR capability, so that would be our extended detection response capabilities that extend from not just the endpoint, but also across servers and IoT, et cetera. So we'll do a breakdown into what the Defender product is. Big takeaway here is this is our TVM. This is our threat and vulnerability management capabilities that are going to extend not just across our software as a service suite, which would be, of course, what you'd mostly think of as Microsoft 365, Office 365, but also extending out into the greater digital estate that you would manage. It would include on-premises servers or those running in Azure, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. Now, the next one is Purview. We've come out with 2 different brands, and both of them start with P, and you'll have to bear with me for a moment. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll have a familiarity with Microsoft Purview, that you'll understand the positioning here. It is our compliance suite, or our family of products for compliance. Historically, as I mentioned, that a lot of capabilities were specific to the productivity suite. So you would think of, for example, doing sensitivity labeling or document management of the Office product, or e-discovery, audit logging, the ability to do data governance was all specifically part of the productivity suite. So this is now extended out beyond just the Office 365 suite to include data wherever it may reside. So you may have data governance that's mapped in terms of being able to identify sensitivity of that information, or to have records management of that information, not just within the productivity suite, but also in on-premises unstructured file storage. It could be in a legacy SharePoint environment, or it could be in various file systems or UNC file shares. To even looking at structured file storage like you would have in SQL. Moving on to the most recent announcements that we just had a couple of weeks ago is Microsoft Entra. So Microsoft Entra is our identity and access management product family. Call it the Identity Suite here. And the most familiar anchor, if you will, for Microsoft Entra would be our Azure Active Directory. So it is now formally called Microsoft Entra Azure Active Directory. And this is our cloud-native directory services. It's really foundational. So Azure Active Directory is really stitched into all of our security and compliance capabilities. It's foundational, for example, for our zero trust strategy. You know, historically, if you go back to the very first versions of Azure Active Directory, it was just directory services for Office 365. And as we've continued to evolve it and we pulled it out as a first-party service as part of Microsoft Azure, it began to provide many more capabilities, such as if you look at the implementation of Zero Trust strategy, we have within Azure Active Directory the ability to not only to authenticate you or maybe to enforce multi-factor authentication, and now even with levels of assurances that you could even say what type of multi-factor authentication or strong authentication that you would require to connect into your highly sensitive information. You also have the ability to say and express conditional access policies, such as the only devices that you can have connect into my system will be those that are managed and are currently compliant. Right? That's really a critical requirement if you look at those of us in the DIB, because if you're going to connect into CUI, that you would need to ensure that only those devices that are managed to the NS 801 and 71 control set are able to connect into that environment. So this is critical because Azure Active Directory can express and control that access not only to Microsoft 365, but even the applications that you run in your data center or the full spectrum of third-party applications. We've also extended that to risk-based controls as well. So you can imagine that, especially if you're looking at prohibiting access from untrusted location or impossible locations, we now have the ability for you to express that to say that if somebody is a higher risk of vulnerability or maybe compromise, that you can go ahead and proactively block their access to the system or to elevate an alert or an incident on behalf of that user. Now, the other parts of the product suite, we're not going to focus too much on today because they're not yet available in GC and GC High, but they are coming on the roadmap in the next 6 months, one of which is our Cloud Knox acquisition. So this is really exciting capability. It's around permission management. I will say that, with the permission management capability, it was acquired to give us that ability to manage permissions and entitlements, not just on our platform, but across the entire digital estates. That would include applications that are running outside of Microsoft. The challenge we often have, though, with these third-party acquisitions is that when we acquire them, they do not snap into our FedRAMP authorization boundary, so it requires additional due diligence for us to sometimes retool those solutions and to get them into our audit. In this case, Cloud Knox is going through our Kratos audit for Azure FedRAMP High. So we do expect to have that as soon as it clears those hurdles. We also have a very exciting new capability. It was built in-house. It's called Verifiable ID. I will say from a verifiable ID that it gives you the ability to loop in third-party capabilities that would proof a user or to provide some validation of a user. A great use case of this that I've been exploring, for example, with ExoStar, is to say that as you are going to access a particular enclave or some protected, highly sensitive information like CUI, or especially with export-controlled data, what if you had that ability to go and do a citizenship check? Not just some identity management thing that you do once a month and go synchronize some flag that says that this user is got an export control. You could do that real time. That would be really a move towards innovation within this industry that would help to secure that data across boundaries. So if you're starting to collaborate with your partners, your vendors, your subcontractors, and suppliers, that you're able to get a real-time attestation of things like citizenship. So we're excited about the identity verification. It is currently in a private preview. It'll extend out and become available within Azure Government in the coming 6 months. Now, that still does require us to work with third-party providers to make that capability available. That's the Microsoft Entra Suite. About 5 years ago, we began down this journey of having to retool literally everything within our product portfolio to support privacy. If you think about the high-stakes requirements that you have around GDPR, that it really did require us to rethink the way that you store and protect data within the system, not just from a sensitivity label and protecting information from I would say a cybersecurity perspective, but also from privacy and the lens of privacy. So Microsoft Priva is our privacy family of products, and it did evolve out of all those capabilities that we had introduced as our part of our platform for GDPR. The one thing I'll say about this is that oftentimes people believe that the GDPR capability is only available within regions of the European tenants, right? We actually, because we manage our entire worldwide infrastructure to the same set of capabilities, all of those GDPR capabilities in Microsoft Priva are available not only within US regions of our worldwide multi-tenant environment commercial, it's also available within GCC and GCC High as well. So you do have those capabilities for being able to do protection of GDPR. Great for those of you that have European user populations in your GCC High tenants. Endpoint Manager, we already dropped a name change on you 6 months ago or so. We're going to keep it the same for just a few days. No, there's a story behind it, actually. It is actually a suite of capabilities. So most people think and interchange Microsoft Endpoint Manager as being Intune. Even internally, we call it Intune. The truth of the matter is we have a whole set of legacy capabilities that we've had for decades, right? If you go back to System Center Configuration Manager, that was our traditional on-premises infrastructure management capability. We've taken much of that SCCM and we've pulled it forward and made it cloud-enabled in such a manner that you have a single dashboard, a single way that you can manage all of your devices, whether they're on-premises servers or they're servers running in the cloud or they're endpoints that are running traditional Windows client or even Mac OS. This is great. We'll even talk about how Endpoint Manager even extends out with Defender for IoT to include registration and management of non-traditional endpoints as well. So Endpoint Manager is a suite of capabilities. Most of you are mostly in tune with Intune. The product Placemat. Who's had an opportunity to download and leverage the product Placemat? Okay, that's great. Most of the folks here. So I won't spend too much time. I will say one of the reasons why I wanted to give you a bit of background on the product Placemat is that I'm going to reference it throughout the rest of the presentation. The Placemat was something that it was, so yesterday I had Seth from Kuzar that did our presentation in this room, and we talked about, how we went on this journey together to release a product mapping to NIST 800-171 and to provide a set of guidance that would extend not only for you to visually be able to see how our products and services from Microsoft map into NIST 800-171, but to also give you a much more verbose description of how you can do implementation statements, et cetera, that fold into, for example, the shared scope of responsibility model to understand what's inherited versus how you can leverage certain services like we talked about Endpoint Manager that would layer in to help you as a customer of our platform be able to demonstrate compliance with CMMC. And it really is well tuned for level 2, and in the future we'll revise it for level 3 as well. But it is representation layout of a periodic table, in which case you can see the columns are each of the product or the CMMC families of practices, and then as you drill down to each one of the practices that you'll be able to see which products or services from Microsoft would either play a primary role in helping you to demonstrate compliance or a secondary role. And if you enable literally all the services, you're going to get upwards of around 85 to 87% coverage of controls. It doesn't mean that just by enabling that feature you're going to be automatically compliant, but it sure does move the needle and provide a set of accelerators. From an implementation perspective, if you drill down into the product placemat, you can see implementation statements such as, looking at here, there's the AC 1.1 around access control, and it'll give you deep links now into how you can be able to leverage, for example, Azure Active Directory in context of Azure Entra Active Directory, in context of how you would demonstrate compliance. From a depth perspective, the spreadsheet for the product placemat didn't really give us a lot of opportunity to have rich content, so we expanded that out into a Microsoft Word document format. That is the technical reference guide, and you'll see that it's also been referenced in various CMMC solutions, such as the Sentinel solution that we'll talk about. I took an opportunity to go break this down by product family or by CMMC practice family, and to see what the primary contributors are. So if you look at, for example, mapping to the 17 controls of the FAR and those families, you can see that there's a natural mapping that you would have for access control to Entra and to endpoint manager, et cetera. I won't belabor these slides, will be great leave behinds, but it just gives you an example of how if you drill down into each one of these controls, you'll see how each of these product families, such as Entra or Purview or Defender, would satisfy those requirements for compliance and specific to CMMC Level 2 especially. So Defender, Microsoft Defender is a set of services, security services, as I mentioned, that are around our XDR capabilities. So that is our extended detection and response, as well as our cloud-native SIEM solution. So as a cloud-native SIEM solution, we have Microsoft Sentinel. The Sentinel is cloud-native in terms of it was never ported to the cloud. It was literally built in cloud and is able to ingest and protect across the ecosystem or your digital estate, to include integration now within Microsoft 365 Defender. So if you look at this marriage of Microsoft 365 Defender and the Defender for Cloud, you now have holistic coverage, not just for the Microsoft Azure for cloud, but also into AWS and Google. We also have coverage across Microsoft Defender, not just for Windows and for example, Microsoft Office 365. It extends to multiple other clients and endpoints as well. We'll dive into that in a bit more depth. So with SIEM, the Microsoft Sentinel solution really does, let's see, go back. Able to collect logs from anywhere. One of the most well-known facts about Sentinel is, of course, that it's able to ingest logs from Microsoft software as a service or Azure solutions at no additional cost for ingestion. Right? This is a high cost for other competing SIEM solutions. We're able to collect in a first-party fashion, be able to collect those logs into Sentinel. To be able to do the detection, analytics, hunting, and intelligence. We also have, and I'll break this down for CMMC, the capability for being able to do mappings to all the practices for CMMC, and to even provide some SOAR capabilities for incident response and for automation. Breaking down the Microsoft 365 Defender versus Defender for Cloud. So historically, Microsoft 365 Defender was our compliance center, our security center. We had a security and compliance center within Microsoft 365, and we had a number of capabilities that were specific to Microsoft 365 software as a service, and that's extended out, and we'll drill down to that in each of the individual products here. The Defender for Cloud was historically Azure Security Center. So if you're familiar with Azure Security Center, it had things like Defender for Server that was integrated into it and gave you the ability to secure resources that were specifically in Azure, such as virtual machines or virtual networks or SQL that were in Azure, now has been extended out to include the ability to have coverage over AWS and Google as well, or even on premises. So let's look at a breakdown to each of the individual products. So for Microsoft 365 Defender, we have the Defender for Identity, Endpoint, Office 365, Cloud Apps, and Vulnerability Management. I have a breakdown of each one of those slides I'll talk about. At a high level, I didn't really put as much emphasis on Defender for Cloud today, but just so you have some context, this does include infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So Defender for Cloud includes Defender for SQL, includes Defender for IoT as well. So you get into more of the structured data that you would have, and of course containers, et cetera. So let's talk about the individual Microsoft 365 Defender products. So this is where we've got a number of name changes that we've introduced in just the last several weeks. So if many of you are familiar with Defender for Identity, was one of the first products that we acquired as a security capability from a company called Adalem. And it's really been fundamental for our security. So it has been a security capability that we acquired that is now a foundation, and the product groups over in Israel that have worked on it have been the ones that have also contributed to the creation of Sentinel and to the creation of cloud app security, et cetera. So Defender for Identity was our ability to take that product and really become a cloud native version of it. So historically, you had to install a bunch of servers on premises and install agents on domain controllers. You still have to install some agents on the domain controllers, but now you have all those services are run in the cloud, fully integrated into the Defender suite. So Defender for Identity was formerly Advanced Threat Analytics, and then we did another rename to call it Azure ATP, and now it's Defender for Identity. Defender for Endpoint, that was formerly our Microsoft Defender ATP, and it was very specific for Windows. We've since extended out Defender for Endpoint to include coverage and threat and vulnerability management, not just on the Windows platform, but also Mac, Linux, and even servers now. It's a big announcement that I'll talk about individually. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is our cloud app security solution. It was formerly Microsoft Cloud App Security, MCAS. Most folks, I think, still just refer to it generically as our CASB solution. I'll break down that in just a moment. And then we have Defender for Office 365, as you can imagine. These are the enhanced capabilities of Defender as it relates to the productivity suite. So we've shifted from each one of these being an individual silo of capabilities to now having full integration across these various different capabilities. So let me give you a quick example. If you look at Defender for Office 365, it could be that you've received some malware, maybe a vulnerability such as ransomware email in your inbox, right? Well, now the challenge is you can be able to identify that with Defender for Office 365 and remediate it, such as going ahead and quarantining or deleting, blocking that particular malware email message. Then the question is where and how far is that file, that vulnerability, been introduced into your system? So naturally, one of the places that it may have been introduced is on your endpoint. If you're running Outlook, then you may have had that file be downloaded or somebody saved it locally. So now you introduce this ability for automation that would work with, for example, Defender for Endpoint, that would have that endpoint protection and vulnerability scanning that could find that particular malware and not only delete it out of email, but find it on your endpoint and delete it there, or to do remediation. Now extend that even further to say if that file has now been introduced to some other third-party system, you can use our CASB solution, like Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, to even have DLP on that endpoint that would be able to detect where you're connecting to other third-party applications. It could be Box or Slack or various other solutions to ensure that you have now extended out that coverage to be able to go and remediate and remove that vulnerability, not just in Office 365, but at the endpoint and beyond. So this is the product placemat that I've rendered for a selection of the Microsoft Defender products. So if you select all the Defender capabilities for both Microsoft 365 Defender as well as Defender for Cloud, you can see that we've got coverage of nearly 2/3 of the 110 controls for CMMC Level 2. Pretty significant. I'd say holistically, that's about as much coverage as any individual cloud service provider could give you with a single suite. And this is just specifically the Defender products. It does not include the Purview capabilities. Again, I'd encourage, if you haven't had the opportunity to download the product placemat and you can drill down, we've got each of the Defender products that are listed as the services. So let's talk about Microsoft Sentinel. So Sentinel historically was Azure Sentinel, and it was very specifically for the Microsoft platform in 2019. This year, in 2022, we've extended it out to have coverage really across your entire data estate. One of the things I also worked with the Sentinel product group a couple of years ago to release a workbook. The workbook for Sentinel was initially for CMMC version 1, and it was very specifically in alignment with the SIEM solution. Now this is fundamental. It gives you the ability to do a full assessment, to ingest all the logs that are coming in from Office 365, from Azure, from on-premises and elsewhere, and be able to map that into the controls for CMMC Level 2 and to turn around and report on it. Now, the challenge with this is it was a very limited view in terms of just being able to ingest those logs that you're capturing and to have a view of it from the Sentinel dashboard. Now, as we released and introduced our Defender capabilities, now Sentinel has become part of Defender for Cloud. So you saw that there's Microsoft Sentinel plus Defender for Cloud. So the user interface for Defender for Cloud is now integrated with Sentinel. So you have now a single pane of glass, a single view of your entire digital estate. And that would include being able to do monitoring of all the capabilities of Defender now, along with the logs that you're capturing with the SIEM solution, with Sentinel, and be able to apply analytic rules. So an analytic rule, like out of the box, would say that you have a requirement to be within some threshold of compliance. So if you're looking at CMMC Level 2, that may say that you have to be at least 85% compliant with a specific family of controls, otherwise it's going to create an incident for you. So it's monitoring that is very specifically in alignment with the taxonomy of CMMC with these analytic rules, but it even goes a step further and has capabilities of more of a SOAR solution so that we can not only be able to do that monitoring, but also to create incidents, right? So these are the playbooks, the ability to trigger an incident that would occur as a result of a threshold that had been met with an analytic rule, for example, and then trigger you to do some remediation. I'll talk about that in a bit more depth. So the Sentinel solution has been revised, now available to you as part of CMMC version 2, and has been available for since February or so, and has been really well received. In fact, it's even in the commercial side environment, is one of the top 10 most used Sentinel solutions that we have just for this small US user community, right? So pretty amazing how much uptake that we've had with it. And one of the reasons for it is that we do have much more information than just a traditional SIEM. So if you look at the control cards, these are an illustration that you can be able to go into each one of the controls, in this case a practice for CMMC, and you can drill down into it. It'll give you that mapping that you have from the product placemat, so you can see the primary services and the secondary services that map into that. But then they also went to a step to give you deep links into each one of those services, to give you a deep link into the the technical reference guide, as well as to give you a set of KQL queries that can go be able to do some investigation to give you a much comprehensive view of how you're meeting or demonstrating compliance with a particular practice. So in this particular case, you can see it's for the AC 1.2 in terms of looking at where you have users sign in by geolocation, and it's even graphically gives you an illustration of where folks are signing in. A use case for the CMMC in terms of looking at the workbook, you have the workbook that is something that you can be able to download from Defender for Cloud and be able to leverage that gives you that assessment, right? So as I mentioned, the assessment for a specific use case may be that you want to ensure that you've got zero trust or least functionality. And inside of the workbook, it would give you an action that you should go and remediate a specific resource that is within Microsoft Azure. In this particular case, it identified that there is a remote storage account that has too much access, right? It's got the ability for somebody to connect into it with public access, and that the recommendation is that you should go and remediate that. So it does give you that option to go and of course, reactively view the environment and to see that you have a recommendation for this remediation action, or that you can also go so far as to have it automatically create, for example, a service ticket for you, whether you are using an internal system or solution like Teams or even ServiceNow, et cetera. So it does give you that ability to respond in a more proactive fashion. I also love the idea with this particular set of capabilities that it's continuously monitoring your environment, right? It's not just a point in time. Once you go and implement CMMC, of course, for compliance across your enterprise, that you want to make sure that you stay within those guardrails, within those boundaries. So this can give you active notifications or even incidents that are generated if you fall outside of those thresholds. All right, so let's talk about pivoting over to our Defender for Endpoint for a moment. This has been a hot topic with many of you, as many are really familiar with our Defender for Endpoint for being able to do threat and vulnerability management on the client. So that would be, of course, installing Defender for Endpoint on Windows 10 or Windows 11 now. And we've, of course, extended that out to include mobile devices with iOS and Android. We did have a gap in their government side environment for some time, in that the ability to do TVM on servers was allowed within the commercial side environment, but not within the government environment. Now, on the commercial side, we had basically we worked with a partner called Qualys in order to meet that functionality for being able to do TVM on servers. However, because Qualys has not fit into our FedRAMP compliance boundary, we were unable to offer that service inside of Azure Government. We are still very close in partnership with Qualys, and many of you are going to continue to use Qualys for scanning of servers, just directly contracting with Qualys for that capability. But we do now have a new option, because we have released the ability to do the TVM on servers as well. So you can enroll now virtual machines running Windows Server into Defender for Endpoint. We call it Defender for Endpoint Server. It has a bit different licensing model. If you think about Defender for Endpoint from an end user perspective, you're paying per user. When you go to enroll Defender for Endpoint Server, it's going to be, of course, a cost per server. We also still fall into the capability that we've had as part of our compute platform, which is in Defender for Cloud. So you can enroll Defender for Server as well and do enrollment for TVM there as well. So it's an option for you. If you're using Qualys, you can continue to use Qualys. If you want to use Defender for Endpoint Server, that's now available for you. At the end of the day, we also have partnerships with Tenable and many of the, of course, defense agencies as well as federal agencies do use Tenable. So with those various partnerships, it really does give you choice. But for those that are going to be cloud native, cloud first, especially many of you that are setting up enclaves for Office 365 and for Azure, leveraging the Defender for Endpoint capability may be a preferred solution. Defender for cloud apps. Historically, pardon me. Historically, we had a limited capability to do data loss prevention on the endpoint. So about 3 years ago, we introduced our CASB solution, which is historically it's been Microsoft Cloud App Security. Now it's called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which has really been well received. The benefit here is it is integrated in with our other Defender capabilities. If you think about it from like a data loss prevention, I mentioned earlier that we can be able to take signals such as from email or exchange online to say that you have a vulnerability that's been introduced and to go out to the endpoint and to do some remediation there to block it. One of the things that has become I would say one of the most enlightening capabilities of the CASB solution is just doing an inventory of the access of all the applications that are being used across your enterprise, right? So this does have the ability to go out and say, okay, well, you have within your portfolio of enterprise IT authorized the use of an explicit set of applications, and those, of course, you've had governance policies that you would wrap around it, and of course have compliance requirements for it to fall within your compliance boundary. But there's also sprawl and the use of various different other solutions that your end users may have access to. So benefit here of the cloud app security capability is that you can be able to have a much broader view of all those applications that are being used and to apply now a governance policy across them, whether you're going to enable new governance policies on various applications or even block them. It gives you a lot more granularity in terms of being able to know where your data resides and to be able to protect it appropriately. So one of the biggest use cases, for example, of cloud app security is to be able to do encryption of documents, for example, to apply sensitivity labels on content before it leaves your system boundary, right? So if you're going to send it to some other third-party location, and maybe it's outside of your compliance boundary, you would want to make sure that you get it encrypted if it's going to be highly sensitive information. Another benefit of the cloud app security is to be able to do, for example, a reverse proxy, so that it may be that an application that's external to your organization does not support the right level of controls that you require for your governance, in which case you may layer this on top of it and say, okay, I'm going to allow you to access this third-party application, or maybe even something that's running in your own data center, right, and a legacy application, but you're going to enforce these additional controls, right, to be able to do data loss prevention, to enforce controls like multi-factor authentication on top of them, et cetera. Oh, this is an exciting one. So getting into IoT. So, if you think about it from the enterprise perspective, IoT has more traditionally been, okay, we have additional devices that are connecting into your enterprise corporate network. It may include printers, fax machines, conference devices, et cetera. As I mentioned earlier, the threat vector really has extended, especially because you have users that are now operating outside of your traditional corporate locations. So if you have folks that are connecting from home, are they printing from devices that are from home? Or if you look at your production facility, you've got operational technology, OT, where you've got many other devices that are in your manufacturing line that would be connected to your network. As you can imagine, one of the largest challenges there is many of those are a vulnerability to your environment, and given many of these IoT devices. If they've not been patched, they're likely, a target for vulnerabilities. So making sure that you can properly inventory all of them, and to be able to apply a governance policy such as ensuring that those devices have been properly patched or have the right level of firmware. So we have introduced our Defender for IoT. One of the things that is really quite cool, it pops with this Defender for Microsoft 365 Defender, is that as you go out there and you inventory all of your IoT devices, it gives you this comprehensive view of all of your devices, your endpoints, your servers, your IoT devices. You can see all of those in a single consolidated dashboard. Now, that gives you an opportunity to view holistically your entire cross-section of endpoints, traditional and IoT, and you can do so without having to install agents, right? This is going to be integrated into your network and have the ability to inventory and to be able to report those back to you without having to go and, for example, install something on those devices. So this is a quick view of that asset inventory. You can see it's really might be better if you download the slide deck from the CS2 website, but there's a view here. You can see all the devices by device type, from Windows to IoT, et cetera. There's a threat management dashboard now that you have. You can imagine a SOC analyst that's signing in every morning and needs to have a holistic view of your environment, right? So this is the ability to pull together not only all the signals that you have across your enterprise that are in relation to the Microsoft product suite, but also into your on-premises and your digital estate, to have a full aggregated view, not only of all the logs or events that are occurring within your environment, but a roll-up of the incidents. And to pull that together, your SOC analyst can have a view of all the actions that are pending approval for remediation, et cetera. You can also see hot news that is extended to you here within the dashboard, and of course you can drill down into it.